Welcome to the Future of Supply Chain, presented by Dynamo. Each episode, we sit down with leaders in the industry as we build the future of supply chain together. Let's get into the show.
Hello to all of our listeners, and thank you for joining us on the Future of Supply Chain podcast. Today, we're fortunate enough to be joined by Bola, a member of AI Fund, to give us a little bit of context on the world of AI, tying into our series, digging into how AI could be applied to supply chain. So, Bola, with that, would love a little bit of background on AI Fund.
Absolutely. Great to be here and excited to be on the pod. AI Fund is led by Andrew Ng. He's a Stanford professor and founded Google Brain, which is one of the really early leading AI research group at Google. He's also the founder of Coursera and DeepLearning.ai, a community of over 8 million researchers in AI. Essentially what AI Fund does is that we are AI experts and we partner with domain experts to build world-class AI companies from scratch. Domain experts could include corporate or industry executives. And essentially what we do is that after validating an idea, we'll recruit a world-class CEO, carry out the technical hands-on work to de-risk the AI concept, and then typically invest $1 million in the company. I'm a principal at the fund.
And what's your story? How did you get into this world of incubating and investing in AI?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a technical background. I was an aerospace engineer, studied aerospace engineering at university. I worked for General Electric, building propulsion systems, and then found my way into the world of startups. Most recently co-founded and exited an AI company that was using AI to predict where car accidents are likely to happen based on contextual data. After exiting that company, I joined Cisco as an entrepreneur in residence, helping them to innovate and think about AI. And then the opportunity at AI Fund came, which really combined both of the things which I really enjoy, which is building companies and investing in companies. And the opportunity to work with Andrew and the fund was super compelling. So I've joined, and I've been with the fund now for over a year.
Perfect. Thank you for that. And we frequently hear from leaders across the supply chain that they're subject matter experts in their zones, whether it be brokerage, procurement, or other areas, but they feel ill informed and poorly equipped to make important decisions. Could we do a quick 101 on AI, such as what is it? What are the different areas? Kind of the high level overview.
Absolutely. So I've been in AI for quite a while. As I said, I co-founded the company in 2016. But I'll say at a really, really a high level, AI are a type of computer programs that are designed to think and learn like humans, essentially. That's really it at a high level. I'll say there are three main buckets to think about AI. And I can talk about how it has evolved over the last couple of years. One is, I'll say, the more predictive analytics, machine learning. So these are things like, forecasting demand, predicting trends based off of data. So a good use case in the supply chain space would be predictive maintenance, for example. Another type of AI is called natural language processing. This is essentially getting computers to understand and work with human language, typically text. Another area is computer vision. This is getting computers to work and understand images. I would say over the last, the previous era was very much focused on computer vision, essentially, which is, for example, using a camera or a sensor to understand and detect that this is a cat, this is a shoe, this is a door, and being able to create business cases off of images. That was the previous era. And also in the previous era of AI, it involved, you needed to have machine learning expertise in your team. You weren't able to actually create any applications without having a core machine learning expertise in your team. Now, what has happened, the paradigm shift that has happened recently is the launch of foundation models. Essentially, what foundation models allow us to do versus the previous era is now you don't need to have a machine learning person on your team. There are companies like OpenAI, like Google, like Microsoft that have trained a model such that all you need is just to connect an API to it and manipulate it. And I would say that's one of the big shifts. The second big shift is the launch of ChatGPT, which is even lower the barrier. Now you don't even need any technical expertise to get value out of AI. You can simply open your laptop, go to a particular website, ChatGPT, and ask it questions. And the domain is really broad. In computer vision, it was very focused on a specific domain or specific problem. With foundation models, the domains are really broad. It can go from anything from being able to explain really complex information around cancer diagnosis, all the way to lore, all the way to, so the domains is really broad. And then finally, the other point I would say is that the transformation has also happened is the rise of large language models, which is within the NLP domain. So the NLP domain as really is sort of the main thing pushing forward. And then I can talk about other trends as well. So that's a brief overview of kind of the beginning of AI up until this point. The main kind of, from a business perspective, the main change is that before you needed a team of ML people to do a project. Now all you need is a couple of developers, and that can plug into some APIs.
That's helpful. Thank you. And dialing in a little bit just more on recent advancements, it feels like constantly we're seeing new iterations of ChatGPT and others. What are some of those key differences as those iterations have come out? What are those key advancements in your mind?
Sure, I think the first couple of models, GPT-1, GPT-2, GPT-3, were very much focused on improving the capability. So improving performance along the lines of being able to talk to different domains, being able to craft emails using the right context. I would say 1 to 3 was very. It was just I would say just significant improvements by using more and more data. So having more and more data, more and more textual data on online, and improving the performance. I would say same thing with GPT-4. I would say where that I would say went into a different kind of level is the rise of something called multimodal models. So typically LLMs have always been text based. Now with GPT-4 role, we're now expanding the modality, i.e., being able to work with text, images, and other types of data at the same time. So that's a pretty significant shift. So I'll say 1 to 3 is really an improvement in performance and so on. But GPT and all the way to GPT-4, but GPT-4 role is a different, allows the opportunity to work with not just text-based data, right? Now you can also expand that to images at the same time. So a good example is you have you can upload a cookbook, right? That will have images and text, and the model is able to understand both at the same time.
Really exciting. Thank you for that. And in your mind, what do you believe AI ready enterprises have to have in place in order to increase their odds of successfully deploying in AI capability?
Yeah, I think the most important thing, I'll say in the previous era, let's say in the computer vision era, you needed to have really really clean data before you could do anything. I'll say in this era, you're able to get started with APIs and so on, out of the gate. So data is still important, but it's not as important. I would say the most important things in my mind would be, number one, what is the business problem you're trying to go after? I think that's super important. Um, you know, what is the business problem? What are the costs? Because that will determine a lot of things. Can you spend more on an expensive model? Can you use a cheaper model? What are the data privacy elements? All of that is really comes down to the business problem. What is the business problem you're trying to go after? That's number one. putting that in place and starting from the business, letting the business lead in terms of any AI projects. The second thing that I would say is to have a really good evaluation framework in mind. So that is, what is the metric you're trying to measure that business problem by, in terms of, is it increasing revenue? Is it decreasing cost? What is making sure you set up a rigorous evaluation framework so that you can iterate these models, right? And also continue to measure the business impact. A lot of people skip that evaluation framework and go straight to the models. If you go straight to the models, you aren't able to really understand how the model is performing, or what success look like, or how to hold and direct the projects to make sure that it's delivering business value. So that's another point. The other point that I would say is, I think a lot of enterprises, given the simplicity or the relative simplicity of AI now, they're of a view that they can build, right, rather than buy. I would push back against that. I think a lot of enterprises should buy most things, unless there are certain capabilities that are critical, in the sense of, yes, it's relatively easy to build something, but now you need to maintain it. You need to keep up with the rapidly changing space of AI. You need to ensure that you have the best models, and most enterprises are best focused on doing their core businesses and leaving the AI applications to startups who are 100% focused on nailing that problem. Then the final point I would say is, really, it relates to the business problem at the beginning, is really to understand the trade-offs between open source versus closed source. There are certain trade-offs that you need to make around that. So the structure of the provider you're using, and the considerations around that.
Absolutely makes sense. And you mentioned startups, which brings up an interesting question. Both you and I sit at the early stages, and we're seeing a lot of noise happen around AI, both in supply chain and in other sectors, of course. And so would love to hear from you how you think about the ways startups can differentiate themselves.
Yes, absolutely. I would say that there are two areas that startups can differentiate themselves. As I said, the barrier to entry has been significantly reduced, right? I'll say there's two areas. One, I'll talk about technical ways to differentiate yourself, and I'll talk about non-technical ways. I think with technical ways, uh, a- actually, before I get to that, the first thing I would say is that it's important to understand what is how your customer measures success, and that is super important in a number of ways. So once you understand how your customer measures success, you can then look to differentiate yourself in an axis that is important to them. We come across a lot of startups that have, hey, we have the best model. Your customer might be interested in the cheapest model. Your customer might be interested in the most compliant model. So firstly, you understand what is important to your customers and what is their axis. What is their axis of how they measure success? And then breaking that down, the two aspects. One is on the technical side, maybe it's by having a more higher performant model. So a model that's more accurate, that is potentially having access to proprietary data that an OpenAI or a general foundation model doesn't have access to. So that's one from a technical perspective. Another is, if the customer is more cost sensitive, having a more efficient model, a model that doesn't cost you as much, cost you the startup as much money, a lot of money, so that you can pass on those savings to your customers. So you have a more efficient, more faster model. For customers that are more sensitive to regulatory requirements, or more sensitive to ethics and so on, it's really important to have a more compliant model, ensuring that your model doesn't have biases, or is more compliant, or is fairer, and so on and so forth. So that's from a technical perspective. From a non-technical perspective, um, uh, startups can differentiate themselves in a couple of ways. One, by focusing on a particular niche and really nailing that niche. Having the messaging and onboarding and workflow really for hyper focused on that specific niche and not trying to do too many use cases at once. Focus wins is for sure an advantage. Another way is for certainly for some of our companies in the medical space, having regulatory having certification or regulatory certificates around their technology is an advantage. For example, one of our companies, Wobot Health, is one of the first companies to receive an FDA approved FDA approval for their mental health chatbot. That is a significant advantage for some customers. And finally, the classic, workflow, good customer service. It's, you can never go wrong with great customer service, great customer experiences. So those are the ways I think about differentiation.
Really interesting. And since the early days of Dynamo, we've really believed in this drop in concept when it comes to robotics and AI, where you're preferably selling into existing budgets or behaviors. We see a lot of AI tools to add to costs of the tech stack and force behavior change. But we think the AI companies of tomorrow could very well be a Trojan horse that looks like something else today. I'd be curious how you think about this at the AI fund and whether you have examples you'd be able to share, whether from supply chain or other industries.
Yeah, so I was thinking about this. Um, I would say, looking at our portfolio companies, I think the use cases they have often gone after are use cases where they're not necessarily replacing a piece of software, a piece of existing software. Typically, they are replacing expensive consultants. That's typically the thrust in terms of that. So you're looking at the budget that a company spends on consultants or spends on the more specialist and expensive that expertise is, the more open or the more easy it is for our companies to go after. So I would say there is still discussion around what is the right business model. We certainly have some companies that are taking a AI services type of approach, essentially providing a service to these enterprises and then improving that behind the scenes. There are some companies that are taking the SaaS based approach. I think it's still very early, and I think it's high. It will be highly dependent on on the specific use case in terms of what is the right business model to attack that, and how customers perceive that. I will say that customers are still have been educated around SaaS and are familiar with SaaS, so I think it's easier to sell in that way. But some customers, especially in this more cost sensitive era, are not looking to add more, SaaS, more random tools. They're looking to take out cost and deliver value. So I think we're still in the really early days of this, and the jury is still out in terms of what is the right approach going forward.
Certainly makes sense. And what do you view as sort of key challenges for growth and adoption of AI inside an enterprise?
Yes, I think really, I think for a lot of enterprises is, where do we start, right? I think there's so much noise in AI, so many amazing things, so many. Even for us investors in AI, it's sometimes hard to keep up. There's just so many things popping up from everywhere. So it's, where do they start? And as I said, it's always important to start from what is the business problem you're trying to solve. Even that in itself takes time in terms of trying to understand and prioritize what are the low hanging fruits, what are the opportunities. One of our companies, I'd like to plug in one of our, one of our companies. One of our companies, Work Helix, actually helps companies get started. They have a really comprehensive platform that helps company think about, okay, where are what tasks do your uh, uh, what repeated tasks does your employees do, where are opportunities for augmentation, what are opportunities for automation. And Workil actually helps them get started. They take a very scientific approach to actually looking at all of the tasks in the organization and recommending and say, hey, this area here is ripe for automation, this area here is ripe for augmentation and can add value to you. So that, I think that's one of the key things. The second area is around data privacy and governance and bias and security. That's a super important area for enterprises, because unlike startups, they're more exposed to liabilities, right, in terms of and regulatory requirements. So this is when they need to, I think it's also a significant concern for them in terms of, hey, where's this data going? Are we going to expose ourselves to a new type of risk? So I think that's also another barrier for companies. And again, I'm going to plug in, I'm going to plug in one of our companies here, a company called Credo AI. Really helps enterprises, monitor the biases and govern and ensure that they have the right frameworks in place before actually deploying these models in an enterprise environment. So broadly, I would say is where to start and how to govern, having model governance, the right model governance in place.
Really interesting. And I certainly relate to that feeling from the investor seat of feeling like there's always more things to learn. I'm spending a lot of time coming up the learning curve. And with that, there may be a bit of a case of I don't know what I don't know. So would love to pose to you, what's a question about AI that I haven't asked yet and how would you answer it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the, I mean, I can maybe not a question, but I can talk about some other interesting areas in AI that I think folks should pay more attention to. I'm a very pragmatic investor, very business focused. So I guess there is a massive question out now in terms of, there has been a significant amount of investment in foundation models, in compute, in GPUs and so on. But where's the business value? Where's the where are the real opportunities to drive business value and really deliver business impact? There are some business impact opportunities, yes, for sure. But I think it's an area that will become more and more important over time. And within that kind of really lends itself to something, to a new space, or an more emerging space called essentially AI benchmarks. How do you benchmark the performance of these models? There are a couple of companies that are doing it at a really high level. For example, whenever GPT-4 launches, it would say, "Oh, we're outperforming um, Gemini," or "We're outperforming," or Mistral will say, "Hey, we're outperforming this model or that model," and this some of these benchmarks are, obviously companies have an incentive to show that their models are better than others models. So it's fuzzy in terms of, how are you actually benchmarking these models. And I think um it needs to go, especially for businesses that are deploying applications, it needs to go a step further rather than just, oh, this is better than this in, legal frameworks, or mathematical this, or passing this test. What does that mean to an enterprise? There needs to be, and there's starting to be a set of benchmarks or frameworks that are used to evaluate application specific capability. So, for example, how well is this model at reading emails from, within a specific supply chain context and delivering the right value to the enterprise? So there's a lot of companies in this space that are starting to focus on domain specific evaluations. For example, Scale AI has launched something called Seal. Hugging Face also has a much more comprehensive leaderboard. Same thing with a company called Vows AI. So I think you're going to see more and more uh, um, uh, focus in terms of measuring, being able to benchmark business level performance for a number of these AI applications. I can also talk about other areas if you'd like, but I can pause there and see if you want to double click on any of those.
No, I think those are all incredibly helpful. Would love if you have other points to dig into, feel free to keep rolling.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess the another is another area which we are very excited about at AI Fund. It's early. It's not there yet, but I think it is definitely coming up soon. And that's the rise of agents. So I guess the difference between a normal LLM and an agent is that an agent can actually interact with its environment. So what's a good example of that? You can tell an agent right now, if you're using ChatGPT, you can only have conversations with it around, hey, what's a recipe to make apple pie, for example, random example, but an example. And that's typically the interaction folks are familiar with. I think with agents, you can do much more sophisticated, much more powerful things. For example, you can say, hey, book a holiday for me in London, and it would go into the internet and execute this task. So if you think about it, it's a lot more powerful than just within chatting to ChatGPT. And there are a number of interesting kind of agent, they call it agentic workflows, design patterns that is important to mention. There's something called reflection, which is essentially where you can ask an LLM to carry out a task, and then you have another LLM to review the task and tell the original LLM how to improve it. So what's a good example? You can say, hey, write me an essay on the history of mathematics. The first LLM writes that essay, then you have another LLM that says critique that. The other LLM will tell the initial LLM, hey, you need to improve this, you need to add this. And what we found is that because of that loop, the performance, the final output is super impressive, super impressive. So that's also a way of improving the performance of LLMs. It's called that particular design pattern is called reflection. Another design pattern is called tool use, which is what I mentioned, where an LLM can go out and use tools. For example, use APIs, search the web, carry out tasks, carry out actions in the real world, if I can use that. Another one is around planning, where you instead of asking an LLM to do something, you tell it, you say, hey, so let's go back to the essay example. You don't just say go and write an essay. You say, hey, come up with a really comprehensive plan of how you're going to write this essay. And then once it comes up with that comprehensive plan, then you say, hey, go and execute it. And you can have the LLM perform each one. And by the time when it combines it, again, the performance is also really super high. And the final one that I'll say is it's almost sci-fi, that I think is really interesting is called multi-agent collaboration. So I can kind of give an example. A good example is you can have different agents that communicate with each other to have a better performance. So, for example, you can have a CEO agent, you have a design agent, you have a product manager agent, you have a software engineering agent, you have a marketing agent, and you say, launch a new startup for me, and the CEO agent will talk to the product manager agent, will talk to the marketing agent, and they will go away. They will go away for a period of time. It takes a period of time, and collaborate with each other and speak to each other, and they'll come up with an output, and the output will be superior to anything that a single agent could have come up with. So it's a really interesting and fascinating and actually super powerful type of a space that I think is worth paying attention to.
Really interesting. And particularly because of that increase in powerful capability, as you highlighted, how should folks think about ensuring accuracy, avoiding things like hallucinations, which can be a concern? How do they sort of navigate those challenges?
Sure. So there are different tools. I think fortunately there are different tools out there that are being provided by both the kind of large companies in this space like Microsoft as well as startups. So one technique that that we've used internally in terms of building. We help to build our company's proof of concepts and so on. So we have hands-on expertise in this area. It's called RAG. So RAG is a way of essentially searching a document. So you can prompt the LLM such that the answers that it generates is anchored in a repository of data that you know to be true, essentially. So using using a technique called RAG helps to reduce the hallucinations. It doesn't completely get rid of it. We have had instances where we've done an experiment and although we focused it on, hey, look, just focus on this PDF, it's created a new type of information that is not in that document. So I think it's something, but RAG will help to reduce a lot of those cases of hallucination, i.e., anchoring the model in a database that you know, or in a set of data that you know to be true. So that's one. Another is essentially buying a number of these solutions that are out there that helps you measure the performance of the model in terms of accuracy. As I said, we have a company called Credo. There are a number of other providers out there that you just need to buy their solutions and integrate it into your overall framework.
Excellent. Well, with that, no more questions from myself. Thank you so much for bringing up these really fascinating topics. And like I said, telling me a little bit about, I don't know what I don't know. So appreciate you highlighting a number of those areas. And with that, I think we can call it a day. Bola, thank you so much for joining us. And to our listeners, appreciate you tuning in as well. We'll continue digging into this topic in future episodes.
Thanks for watching. Follow us at dynamo.vc for all the latest episodes. We'll see you next time.